The Light of Darkness, a warrior's tale for our time. You don't know what you don't know. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or good night, I should say. It's 10:59 p.m. on Tuesday, April 16th, and I just wanted to do a podcast. I find these podcasts very therapeutic for me because I allow myself the vanity of believing I might be helping some people. And I don't know for sure, but I do know that there are some things that need to be spoken aloud in a very direct way that not a lot of people are doing. A lot of people are doing certain things, being legal, I suppose, or scientific or procedural, and trying to tell us various snippets of what might be going on in the world, and this pertains to everything that's going on. The wars, the food supply, the state of public medicine, the introduction of euthanasia through the Medical Assistance in Dying program in Canada. So I thought I would do just a quick podcast and give my thoughts on this. There is no way that this can be seen as anything other than an intentional and institutionally driven depopulation agenda. It's what it is. Call it what it is, okay? We've had telegraphing of this, and telegraphing is a boxing term. It's something you learn as an advanced boxer, that you can study a person's body, their foot position, and by the way they shift their body, you know what kind of punch they're going to throw, and from what side, the left, the right, an uppercut, a cross, a hook, a jab, a straight right, so on and so forth. And telegraphing is a big part of what the other side has to do. And there are reasons. There are immutable laws that govern this reality. And if you think I'm fanciful or superstitious for saying that out loud, then I would simply ask you to ask yourself, why do the people who are in charge of things go to such an extent to let us know what's going on, albeit indirectly, many times, whether it be through cinema or some other form of event that, in terms of receiving truth, that is what I would call peripheral. It's not head on, but it comes into the consciousness. The idea comes into the consciousness, and that, I suppose, I know, from a spiritual perspective, is what we could call disclosure. And disclosure is very important, and you need to understand why it's very important for the other side to mitigate their liability. It has to do with the free will rule down here. And they have to be able to say at the end of the day that we were told, and our failure to dissent was presumed to be consent. And this is a legal principle that extends into the courtroom as well. So if something is said and you don't contradict it or you don't dissent to it, you are presumed to consent, to agree to it. And this is the fulcrum upon which the entire modern system operates in the first world. And in many ways, they're trying to creep this into the second and third world as well. And the fulcrum upon which the lever operates is the person, the legal person, which is an identity created through the birth certificate. Now, you've heard these ideas before, I'm sure. They've been kicking around for 20, 25 years. But perhaps you've never had them spiritually explained to you, why they're important tools for the other side to mitigate their liability and their culpability in what's going on. You cannot say to somebody that they were given a free will decision when the liability for dissent is loss of livelihood. But you can do it when the system that they're living in is entirely yours. And the system you live in the first world is entirely the controllers. They built it, they maintain it, they keep it greased, they keep it oiled, they keep it running. It is their system. And if they come into lawful governance, and this could be through bot elections or puppet elections or any of the farces we call elective processes that we've seen in the last 10 years in Canada or the United States, then that group of people running the country are presumed to be representing all of the people. Now, the truth is, of course, they represent the political interests and the shadow interests that never publicly declare themselves in their political leadership, because that's how you really get into office. I don't think there's anybody really outside of this paradigm now. I don't think there's anybody who's going to come on the horizon and turn this situation around. I think Donald Trump is something that we haven't quite understood yet. Let's put it to you that way. And I see him emotionally as the better response to the 2024 election, but only marginally, and only because the Democrats are so openly psychotic now. And I hold out hope that, Trump will, in some measure, at least slow down, if not stop, what I consider to be the culling of the American population and the controlled demolition of its culture through the incitement of racial violence, gender dysphoria, gender enmity between straight males and straight women, and a culture that is literally collapsing in on itself because it can't reproduce properly anymore. And this is why all the replacements are being brought in. Okay. Now, there are a lot of people who see what's going on and they speak their minds to some degree, I suppose, not as clearly as maybe they should, and coming out and saying that this is an open depopulation event. But this has been in the plan for over a century. You can read references to this in the planning papers of the controlling groups on this planet. I mean, whether it be the letter of Albert Pike or the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. Whether that is a Jewish document or not is debatable, but it exists, and it's exactly what's going on in the world now. Okay? And I'm not trying to blame anybody or point fingers at anybody. That's not my job here. My job is to make people, if I am being of service, my job is to make people aware of what's going on around them and give them some opportunity and motivation to perhaps protect themselves. The British economy is going to fall. The American economy is going to fall. The Canadian economy is going to fall. The Australian economy is going to fall. The New Zealand economy will probably fall. The Italian economy will probably collapse. The Spanish economy will probably collapse. The Brazilian economy under its present government will probably collapse. Now, there's so many moving parts to what's going on now. It's hard to get focused, to get a snapshot, to get a clear picture of what's going on. Some people, if they're politically oriented, will tell you that this is a communist takeover. I would say that, yeah, that seems to be right if you look at it politically. But I don't think the communists would be so coy about killing people. They've always been very open about their killing. It's always been done in open warfare or by going door to door and gathering people up. They would never supplant their desire to depopulate into a medical regiment or anything like that, which is the principal depopulation tool right now. It's a slow burn. And this is what these people are masters of, okay? They've created an attention span and a stupidity in people through social media and other things, which is just absolutely staggering. There is literally no common sense left in people because people don't live common lives anymore. There's no desire for people to possess common sense anymore because every part of their day is a spectacle. It's a spectacle on social media. It's a spectacle of hate in the religious communities. It's a spectacle of denial in the New Age communities. It's a spectacle of denial in political circles. And I think slowly people are starting to catch on that, look, this is depopulation. And they published all of this on a website called Deagle.com 15 years ago. I was talking about it on radio stations I worked on, 8, 9 years ago, bringing out the Deagle.com numbers. I'm not sure you can find it anymore. I was looking for it a little while back and I wasn't able to find it, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere. Now, the Deagle.com site alleged to be the product of a private intelligence firm, which had been commissioned to do this work, and they were asked to calculate population in 2025. And they state in the preamble how they did it and the materials that they used. And it's quite extensive, you know, the numerous freedom of information. Canada, European countries. It seemed to be a lot of work. Now, it could all be just a front, you know, like um, it could be nonsense. I don't know. It seemed to be genuine to me, and it had a feel of authenticity. But it was super creepy. I mean, if it was some kind of dark humor, a lot of work went into it. You know, it would be like saying that the Georgia Guidestones were dark humor. Well, that little dark humor joke, I mean, that cost somebody a pretty penny to have those stones carved and placed where they were and transported out there. That would have been 50, $100,000. How many people do you know who would do that as a joke? Okay. And it's the same thing with Deagle.com. It's sort of like the informational equivalent of the Georgia Guidestones. Depopulation has been around for a long time. It's what we call the Malthusian school. Okay. Now, I suppose you could make the case that geographically, there's still plenty of room for people in the world. I heard P.J. O'Rourke, the satirical American writer, say one time about 10 or 12 years ago when the population was probably about 7 billion, 6.5 or 7 billion. He had written a book and he was promoting it. And he said the entire world's population could fit comfortably into the state of Texas. And he's probably right, but it might be a little, I don't know, a little bit Shanghai in its feeling. Um, the Chinese, for the most part, like to live in very, very dense cities, shoulder to shoulder. They're very, very comfortable as a collective consciousness. And so they get along very, very well. You can get cities that are, you know, geographically a fifth the size of New York with 8, 9 million people, you know, like Taipei in Taiwan, things like this. So how do you defend against this if it is a depopulation event? Well, the simple truth is it's pretty difficult to do if you're not near retirement age and you don't have the ability to buy land somewhere that is safe, and there are safe places in the world. This is a controlled depopulation by my observation. So for those of you who don't know, um, I live in Latin America, I live in Central America, and the medical regiment that went through North America came through here as well. But there don't seem to be the same consequences, leading me to believe that although the markings on the box are the same, not all the medicine batches are the same. It seems as though the most severe forms of the reaction to the medicine have taken place in certain ethnicities. Um, and I would say that the Black and the white community are highest in that regard. Now, a study by Stanford University posited that the best genetic makeup to survive the medical regimen, if you're forced to get something put into your body, were the Ashkenazi Jews. Isn't that interesting? Now, if you study the data, there are injuries in Israel as well. So we can't make the claim that, again, as so many people want to do, that this is Jewish. I just don't buy it. It has Jewish elements, I'll give you that. There are a lot of very powerful Jewish people who seem to be within the sphere of this death cult that's running the world. And that does, in and of itself, not make it a Jewish phenomenon. Okay? To my best guess, I would say it's very very, very similar to what Bill Cooper used to say in the Hour of Our Time, his shortwave radio show. You can listen to the whole thing now, all 50 episodes up on Spotify. It's well worth your time. He's one of the godfathers of conspiracy theory. I hesitate to even use that term anymore because we are so far beyond the idea of conspiracy theory now, it isn't even funny, because everything is coming true. There's a certain synergy and a certain planning that almost seems to me, and these are all just my opinions. I speak with no authority but my opinion. And the attending logic and evidence I give you in terms of my observations and the way I concatenate together these observations to form a context that you might feel comfortable in, or if the full realization of what I'm saying hits you, you might feel very uncomfortable in this context. So here we are in 2024, and let's take stock of everything that has happened in the last 5 years. Well, let's go a little bit further back, actually. Let's begin it in 2001, which was the birth of the counterculture, the political counterculture. And that's another interesting thing. The counterculture of the 60s was a left-wing movement. The counterculture of the new millennium is a right-wing movement. Isn't that interesting, the way it switched sides, right? So the right has become a counterculture now. It's bucking the narrative. And the people holding down the narrative are probably the baby boomers from the hippie generation, okay? The people who in their time formed the largest counterculture known in the Western world, the hippie movement, right? Brilliantly documented by Hunter S. Thompson and brilliantly soliloquized by Hunter S. Thompson in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, when the last part where he talks about the high water mark of the 60s, right? And how it just disappeared. And there was no spiritual discipline to the movement. It's amazing to me that Hunter S. Thompson caught that, given how ill-disciplined his own life was and how excessive his appetites were. But his perception, and specifically his emotional perception, was dead on. Everything he looked at, he hit the nail right on the head. Okay? So the counterculture is the right wing now. And it begins officially in 2001 when the Twin Towers come down in New York, and then subsequently Building 7 is imploded, although the other two buildings were imploded as well. But I don't want to do any 911, but I'm going to make my case to you, okay? So these people speak in this death cult, whatever it is that is behind this depopulation, they speak very directly and very simply. You really cannot say you were not told if you're paying attention. And if you're not paying attention, if you're drunk or you're stoned or you're distracted with video games, that's on you, okay? That's on you, man. You have to have some attention for things other than yourself. And this is another one of the problems, is the unbelievable level of self-involvement that they've created in the first world now. Literally every human being over 18 lives in their own personal bubble now, okay? And as virtual reality and AI kick off, that's going to become very, very literal. People are going to be living in virtual bubbles. That seems like a fate almost worse than hell to me, you know? I can't imagine why people would want to live like that. I mean, I like to live in a very real and a visceral world. I live in the rainforest. I live with parrots and frogs and toads and snakes and sloths and geckos and iguanas and monkeys and wild pigs and jaguars and bullet ants, and everything here is very visceral and very alive, kind of like Mel Gibson's Apocalypto. And I like it that way because it grounds me to reality. And I see these people now in this culture that's coming about in the first world, and I just cannot even believe what I'm seeing. It's just mind-boggling to me. Now, what is driving this depopulation event? Well, it's definitely hiding under the cover of religious prophecy, okay? Now, those of you who listen to me know that I believe in an intelligent creator. I believe that creator loves us, and the gift of life is the expression of that love. However, I don't have a very high regard or high utility for religion. I think religion is just a mind trap, and not all religions. I think Buddhism is an extraordinary discipline. The meditation discipline is extraordinary. Um, but most religions in the West, our principal religions, beginning with Adam and ending with Muhammad, they're just not helping anybody anymore. And I mean, the simple question has to be asked, why would you tell people the future? Why would you lay down all these prophecies in an end time prophecy? If you know anything about consciousness, you know that it's a manifestation factory. We're all co-creating this reality, whether we realize it or not. Spiritual practice is the attempt to wake up to the reality of your own co-creation and realize that you are a co-creator being with the principal creator, your creator. It works through our consciousness. Now, here's the curious thing. When you put in front of people a series of prophecies which tell them how the world is going to end and all of these sorts of things, you're kind of cheating, aren't you? I mean, what is the point? If God lives in the eternal now, why would you use the future as your tool to teach people about him? Well, sometime in the distant, distant future, this is going to happen. The problem with prophecy is that it is bad form in spiritual teaching. Okay? Very bad form. Nobody has the right to tell you the future, even if they can see it. Okay? Very curious thing. And this is a cautionary tale for psychics as well. You shouldn't tell people the future, even if you can see it. Think about all the cautions we get about time travel and what might happen in time travel. Okay? How you shouldn't tinker with time. Like if we were to build a time machine and go back and you accidentally killed your grandfather, would you exist, or would a new timeline be created? What would be the causal effect of tinkering with the timeline by sending someone in the present to the past? I'm not quite sure. But I think it's the same thing for psychic phenomenon and prophecy. I mean, even if you can see the future, shut the fuck up. Keep it to yourself, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We don't give a fuck. We're here to live in the moment and to feel the presence of the divine in this living moment, not be trapped by your prophecies of doom 2,000 years in the future. It's also extremely power-based. You know, it's a very, very malicious thing to do, to dangle a meta reality in front of somebody through the demonstration of a power to prophesize. Okay? Would a loving God want you brought to him by power? I don't think so. I don't think so. So we're in a massive depopulation event right now. And it started, okay? There were 158,000 excessive deaths in 2023 in the United States, the highest ever recorded. And that's taking into account all the other things that are creating excessive death, okay? Fentanyl, all of the new synthetic drugs that are out there, all of that is factored into these equations, and we are left with 158,000 excessive deaths. And the reason we know this is real is the people talking about it the most are the vice presidents at insurance companies who have to pay life insurance policies. Okay, so the life insurance industry is in danger of collapsing because the predictive models by which they were able to make money based on death rates and people's life habits have significantly changed because of the medical regimen forced upon the first world. Isn't that interesting? Now, here's another curious thing. the same excessive deaths are not happening where I live in Central America. They're just not happening. I think I remember reading one story about a high school uh, teacher who was going for a run with his students. He was coaching a school soccer team, and he was in his 40s. And we got back from the run. He fell over. He had a heart attack, but that could have just been a heart attack. The guy could have had congenital heart weakness, right? But I'm not reading anything in the newspapers, and you know, my wife comes from a family of 11 kids, and there are countless nieces and nephews, probably, over 50, um, and their spouses, and then they're having kids now, so the grand nieces and nephews, and we're not hearing anything by 6 degrees of separation. We're not hearing anything through the grapevine. So there's something going on here. And another curious thing is the currency here keeps getting stronger and stronger. I get more job offers from Central America now based on the location I put on my LinkedIn page than I do from North America. And the wages have gone up here significantly. So there is just a lot going on now. And they seem to be moving the world around. And some land they're burning in a controlled burn to mineralize the earth with the ashes and reseed it. And I'm speaking metaphorically here. I mean, the scarified land is in fact the civilization itself. And there are other parts of the world where they're dumping heaps of fertilizer and adding to the abundance that's already there. So I'm seeing this with my own living experience. And I'm trying to tell people, people um, I know in North America, in Canada, and the United States, like, look, this is starting to look a lot like a controlled depopulation event. Now let's move this over to the wars. When you look at the evacuation of Afghanistan, the Joe Biden administration, you look at Ukraine and you tell me that is not a deliberate depopulation event. They are literally culling the Ukrainian people. Now, who hates Ukrainian people? Okay. Who is the ancient enemy of the Ukrainian people? I'll leave you to answer that question. You can probably figure it out with a Google search. Okay. So that's not a war, it's a depopulation event. Now, whether Putin's in on it or not, I don't know. Whether his hand was forced and he's just doing what he has to do, and Zelensky keeps throwing bodies at the circumstance, and the United States keeps sending more money and military equipment, well, then the fighting is going to continue, and the Putin regime has to respond. That's one possible scenario. Another scenario is Putin's in on it. I mean, he is a graduate of the Young Leaders Program at the World Economic Forum. Now, another thing I notice is that when people talk about things, they don't know what they're talking about. If you're going to talk about the WEF, for crying out loud, man, take 2 days, 4 hours one evening and 4 hours the next evening, and read the entirety of Klaus Schwab's book. It's there in EPUB form on the WEF website. It lays out everything he wants to do and the WEF wants to do in the future. But people are so lazy now, so distracted by their self-involved lifestyle, their electronic and digital distractions, and everything else going on in their life, that they don't take the time to do the due diligence. But they put it right down on paper. It's like 300 pages, his book. You could finish it in 2 nights if you're a competent reader. 1 week if you took your time. How many people have done that? Okay. One of the things that Schwab stresses again and again in his book is the overpopulation of the world. Okay, let's say that's true. Let's give them their cake. Why would you not just go to the public and say it? We're overpopulated. Do you realize with a consenting public who agreed to have for every two people on the planet, they would only have one child? If you did that for one generation, you would cut the world's population in half. And coincidentally, and this is another thing I can't factor, the damage to the environment and the overconsumption of resources and the myth of global warming have created such a guilt complex in specifically white, educated first world people in the United States, Britain, France, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, that not many people are having a lot of children. I myself had one son. My brother had two. So he and his wife equaled their footprint in the world, but they didn't add to the population. But even I have one friend who had four children, which is fine. But many people are not having children now. Many people have gone to alternative sexual expression, um, bisexuality, transgenderism, different ways of expressing their sexuality. That's another freaky thing that keeps going on. I mean, there are so many freaky things going on in the world, you can hardly keep up. I mean, what is with all the sex cults? Jeffrey Epstein, this Navixium insanity. And that had big people in it. It had two of the daughters from the Bronfman family, which is Canada's richest Jewish family, in this sex cult, Navixium, or whatever the hell it was called. And they were tattooing people, and people were openly volunteering to be sex slaves. Again, a tremendous distortion of the procreative urge in the human animal and taking away sexual energy from childbearing, which is its natural utility. However handy it might be in black magic and sex magic and compromising people and blackmailing people, never forget its principal utility is the creation of life. Okay? This is another element of the depopulation. But again, it's not going on everywhere. The funny thing is, the poorest people in the world are breeding the most. Okay? You come where I live, a guy and his wife will live in a wood shack with a dirt floor and maybe a draw curtain as a bedroom separating the husband and wife from the five kids, and they just live there and cook over an open fire, and they're completely happy. Five kids. Okay? Africa is not has not stopped procreating at all. Um, Everybody seems to be procreating except educated white people, educated Japanese people, educated Spanish people in Spain and Argentina and Brazil. So if this is a depopulation event, why is it that the intelligent first world people seem to be targeted and the third world people are just going on about their business and having 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 children? Doesn't make too much sense. And if you were going to depopulate, why would you depopulate the people who got the message 20 years ago in like my generation? Gen X, the families are much smaller than the baby boomers. The millennials are smaller if they've even started their families. Gen Z has almost no prospect of family in Canada, at least in Canada, due to the cost of a family home. The society is literally being collapsed, literally being collapsed. You've got the medical assistance in dying program in Canada. I'll tell you a story about that. There was a woman who went into the emergency room with severe abdominal pain. Turned out she had stage 4 stomach cancer. They said they could do an operation and there was a very high probability she would live. The only problem is the lineup for the operating theater in the hospitals of that province were so backed up they couldn't get her in time. So on the one hand, they tell her her disease is curable by modern medical science, which she's paid into her whole life through the socialized medical system in Ontario. Then they tell her they can't save her because the wait list is 10 or 11 months, and she would have to be operated on in the next 4 months to be saved. Then, and here's the coup de grace, then they offer her medical assistance in dying. She left the hospital, she left the medical establishment of Ontario, took out her life savings, did a GoFundMe, went down to the United States and paid out of pocket for the operation. She's alive and well today. What kind of a society behaves that way while simultaneously bringing in 500, legally that we know of, 500,000 immigrants a year? Okay? What kind of a country would do that? Anybody can understand this. Even the people who are coming into Canada, they must even know more than the average Canadian. They must look at those people on the street and go, do these idiots not know they're being replaced? And they don't. And my question is, why is there so much of this cognitive dissonance? Why have people lost this fundamental human understanding of when you're in danger? Okay? When you're in danger. How do they not even know that anymore? Okay? Or have they all just reached a state of consciousness where they're literally, they want to lay down their lives in a kind of de facto suicide because make room for other. I really don't believe that level of consciousness has been achieved. So it's not a willing sacrifice. It is literally stupidity. Okay? I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.